and he deals with a lot of the technology on staff, IT, and so on. And so he has a question just as the mic makes its way. Statement, not a question.
Yeah, no, it's me. I've got a question. Stephanie.
Stephanie, sorry.
Yes. I was just going to ask, how does, obviously AI as a tool set helps to serve us by making things more efficient and helping us move faster. What does that mean for us in a fast-paced society already, moving even faster in the future, and what does that impact look like? Because I think in a Christian context, busyness can often also remove us from the presence of God rather than enhance that. So what does that look like for us in the future?
Did you catch that,
That's
Mal?
that's a great question, Stephanie. Thank you. And I'm glad you explained it with Stephanie, because I would have wondered why Jacko had such a high voice. But that's a great question, Stephanie. There's so much in that question. If I just take one part of it, I think that we've already learned in the age of, say, social media, for example, that speed is not necessarily a guarantee. Speed of access to knowledge is not a guarantee of wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge in righteous ways. And doing something speedily and getting access to intellectual understanding quickly doesn't necessarily help us to apply it in righteous ways. So I think a premium on wisdom will be the case going forward. I think more and more people already are starting to pull back from things like social media to give some thought for the benefit of their mental health, but also just to be able to reflect a little more on what they're seeing and reading before they're bombarded with the next thing they're being asked to consider. And the problem with the internet is that it has always been, or today's version, the cloud, is that it is an ecosystem of distraction. When you read a book, you don't go to the footnotes at the bottom of the page and immediately say, I'm going to go out and buy that book and read that. You finish the book you're already with. Online, you don't do that. You see the hypertext link, and many times you'll press on it and you'll skip from one thing to another. So we end up thinking broad and shallow, but not narrow and deep. So we don't specialize in the way that we once did. And yet we need specialists more than ever in an age of generalized learning. So I think as Christians, we need to recognize we have a role as leaders to train people to think in critical ways, not criticism. Critical thinking means pulling an idea apart to see if it's consistent within itself and where it leads logically. And we need to train them in reflective thinking, in taking time, pausing, asking certain questions of the idea. Thank you for that great question, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's an age of distraction, isn't it? And AI helps us to be distracted. I love what you said about reading, because I grew up reading, and I'm a great lover of books and reading. But even now with electronic books, the footnotes, the highlighted sections, I'm tempted. Who's this author? Never heard of him. Is he credible? Then I go there. And after half an hour, I realize, hang on a minute. I've gone down a rabbit trail. I'm busy reading a book. So I've had to discipline myself with that, because it wasn't accessible before with paper. So it requires huge discipline from us. Another question, someone in the corner? Rowan. Rowan is our music director, one of our music directors from the worship team.
Yes, thank you so much for the insightful, AI is telling me to stand. For the insights. I came across something on social media a couple days ago. A prominent worship leader asked AI questions about himself, just asking who is such and such a person, silly questions towards the end. Why does he paint his nails? What about this person? Is this person also involved? Anyway, turns out AI's response, this was the built-in AI system on Meta, so I assume it's the same for WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. It started to say that certain worship leaders are actually struggling with sexuality. One actually identifies as gay, and these are prominent people in church circles. Churches probably use their music from time to time. So my question is, how do you not really discern, but people obviously use these platforms because it's so easily accessible in terms of WhatsApp, young people, youth, volunteers, coming to you with false information, that AI has generated and given it back to them. One of the things you mentioned earlier was AI bias, and I hope I didn't misinterpret what that point was. But it seems, how do we know if AI has a social agenda versus pure truthful information?
Rowan, thank you for an excellent question. I think it's a broad question, actually. It goes beyond the terms that you've delineated there. It goes into politics, it goes into economics. How do we know when something we're being told is right or is more likely to be right than wrong? We don't, of course, accept it at face value, and this is where training people to think critically is very important. But one of the things I tell leaders is we need to make sure that we read very widely. We need to read widely, we need to listen widely, we need to make sure that our sources don't always agree with one another. So, for example, if you're talking about if someone came to you with a political thing, and this would apply too to worship leaders and pastors, if someone comes with a claim, you need to be able to say, well, hang on a minute, I've read different options here, and I've weighed it up, and I think this is more likely to be true. X is more likely to be true. So I need to read as widely, just stay in touch with things as widely as you can. And we need to be able to, not to be paranoid about AI's bias, but just to be aware that it is there. That's a big jump for many people. To understand that a search engine is the same. It'll tell you what the algorithms think you want to know based on your already set search history. So that's not very helpful, because there are times when you want those serendipitous moments of coming across an idea you've never heard before, but it might be something that's really instructive to you. You won't come across it because you're in the rabbit hole, as Pastor Andre said. You're just hearing what you already know. So I think it's very important we read widely. I think it's very important that if we come across something we know to be untrue, we try to address it. I mean, online, we try to address it. It doesn't mean you could be doing that all day, every day, I know, but something that you think you feel very strongly about. If a worship leader was accused of something and you knew this was false, you'd need to say so. As Paul says, speaking the truth with the accent on love. So respectfully, but correcting it. I think too often Christians pull out. We abdicate responsibility to say anything. I'm sure that's not true of you guys. So that's important. Step back. Read widely. Reading widely allows you to have a gut feel for things, and you get a sense of, it's not only spiritual discernment, it's natural discernment too, where you can say, that doesn't feel right to me. What I know, it just doesn't feel right. So I'll go away and check up on it for you and let you know.
Very good. Yeah. Such difficult things, because everything we see or read, we believe. As you know, Mal, the Greek word for judge is, one of them is diakrisis, to see through. And I've often said this to young people: don't be enamored with things, don't be gullible, don't be like that dustbin where you tramp on it and the lid opens and you swallow everything. Be discerning more than ever. But I love what you said, you have to be widely read, biblically widely read, and otherwise too. Then you're able to make a judgment. Whereas if you're very narrow or you're only looking at one aspect, you can be easily fooled. Anyone else? Question? Pastor Dean, he's the campus pastor at Durban North with his wife, Janette.
Hi, Mal. Thanks so much for your input today. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to hear your thoughts perhaps on, is there a connection between AI and maybe end times theology? Because you've heard people ask the question, is AI the Antichrist? Is it the start of the end of all things? I think maybe when the internet first came about and there was Google, people thought that as well. Now, today most people have just sort of embraced Google as part of life. We use it every day, even those who were maybe against it initially. Would AI does it have the potential to enforce, the new world order, the world domination, being able to control all people, being able to enforce the mark of the beast, all those things? Maybe just some of your thoughts, whether there is a connection or whether AI is just simply the next thing in human progression.
Thank you, Pastor Dean. Boy, that is a pastor's question. It's a 3-hour question. We don't have 3 hours. Look, I think the bottom line is that as Christians, we should engage the present and where we can influence the future. We can't always influence the future because God is sovereign, but we can in many cases because he has given us the role of having dominion in the earth. He wants human agents to be his representatives in earth, honoring him in the process. Having said that, I think that we can't afford to be paranoid. That's the first thing. We can't afford to shrink back in fear about what might or might not be coming. Anyone that tells you they know exactly what's going to happen in the quote end times is not telling the truth. They may mean well, but there's some sort of disingenuousness there because none of us do. John didn't even understand Revelation when he wrote it. Daniel didn't understand Daniel chapter 7 to 9 when he wrote it, but he wrote it out of obedience. I think that it's worth noting too that in history, by the way, knowledge of history will help you a lot with dealing with this fear element. History shows that, for example, when the printing presses were being smashed up by the Luddites and others, it was Christians who were involved partly in that process, not only Christians, but there were Christians involved in that. They were afraid of what printing presses might mean to the future. Well, as it turned out, the printing press became the greatest thing to ever happen to the church technologically since written scrolls. It was the printing press that allowed the Reformation to happen, that allowed the spread of the gospel through the world in so many ways. So we need to be careful, first of all, of the paranoia element, and we need always to remember that our goal, and you know this, Pastor Dean, I know you do, but it's worth reminding our people, our goal is not to be ready for the Antichrist or to look for the Antichrist. Our role and goal is to look for the coming of the Christ. He's the one we're focused on. The Antichrist is the fake counterfeit that precedes the real thing. And we are called to declare the coming of Christ. That's our goal. That's what we're meant to be doing. So my only advice in a very short space would be keep your focus, help people keep a focus on that as their ultimate goal. When people say to me, isn't the internet and AI just the Tower of Babel all over again? Well, in history, you can see many examples that have similar motivations as the Tower of Babel. It's not one. There might be another one in 50 years' time. We don't know. When Luther was asked, what would you do if someone told you Jesus was coming back today? He said, I'd plant a tree, which sounds very obscure, but it's his way of saying, listen, nobody knows the day or the hour, number one. Number two, I'd want to be doing something today that will last. So I'd plant a tree. I'd live as if the Lord might return today, but plan as if he might not return for 100 years. That's the concept I'm talking about. That's an excellent question. Thank you.
Very good. I think that the Antichrist will use whatever means at the time, but we need to also use whatever means. Good point, Mal, with the printing presses and the fear that came. I remember when television came to South Africa. Do you all remember? All the Christians said, it's the devil, it's the box of the devil, throw it out. Some men's ministries in America had people throw their televisions in the skips, and there was a whole movement, and then guys secretly went off to Target and bought them again and replaced them. So you're knee-jerk, as we probably will see, but we need to keep looking to God. Anyone else? Talia. Talia is from the what we call our marketing department, responsible for print, advertising, and marketing, presenting the church.
Hello, thank you so much for your information and especially giving it to us through a biblical lens. From a creative perspective, how do you see how AI will affect traditional artists, and how do we use AI as a tool that helps us to grow things, to be creative, but doesn't replace the freshness of art, as well as does not take advantage of artists that already exist? Do you feel that ethics and copyright hasn't caught up to AI yet? And is there a way that we as Christians can bring something fresh while using AI as a tool? especially as things are changing and as laws are being put into place and as things are developing?
Thank you, Talia. That is a great question, as I would expect from anybody in marketing. It's one of my favorite professions. I was an architect, so marketers kind of speak the same language. I think there's a lot in that. I did 2 interviews. You can find them somewhere on our 2030plus.com site. One was with Sky News on Australia on the future of the arts in the age of AI. The other was on copyright with Talk Radio here in the UK. Copyright, you're right, hasn't caught up yet with AI, and it's going to be a thorny issue going forward for the next decade or more. We will have to find a way to give people both credit and remuneration for data that is being trawled by AI models without credit today. We're going to have to find a way to do that and hold big tech companies accountable for it. On the area of the arts in particular, I think in time, artists will actually use, wise artists will use AI as the Renaissance painters used their apprentices. Michelangelo, as a sculptor, used many apprentices. Some of them went on to become famous artists in their own rights. He was the one overseeing the work. He was the great artiste and the master, but his disciples, his apprentices, were given certain roles in specific parts of the project. And I think we will learn to do that with AI. We will learn that it can be at best our collaborator, at worst our usurper, but at best our collaborator. And we're starting to see that now with video. We're starting to see it with music. I think we'll see a lot more of that in areas like marketing. There was a marketing campaign released just last week that the video was completely made by AI with almost no input. The description of the product, the description of the market, that's about it. And this video is amazing. None of it's real. It's amazing. But you can see the day when a whole marketing campaign could be done by AI from start to end. We have to be sure that we're willing to keep it as our servant and use it as a collaborator rather than shutting the door altogether. I think that human creativity will always flourish because, again, machines can't empathize. The greatness of art is that it can pull on emotion. It can speak to emotion. It can help us feel and question what many people call the, quote, human condition. We alone are equipped to do that. We are given by God the ability to do that. Machines can't really do that. They can fake it, but there'll be times when I want to see a sculpture done by someone with my limitations. I want to see the Pieta as if it's done by a human being because it's such a marvel. I don't want to see a Pieta that's done by a machine. In the beginning, it might fascinate me, but after that, it's just, oh, it's a machine. Of course it can do that. So I think there will always be a place for human artists. And in the church, we need to take the initiative now as creative Christians to use AI and invent new ways of using AI, even before others do, so that we prove this principle of being collaborator, not usurper.
Very good. Yeah, that what you said earlier, the human loop with AI. And it's true, you want to see something that someone's produced. If you stood in front of the statue of David in Florence, is it? It's when we stood there, it's quite incredible that a machine didn't make that. And you realize, yeah, like you say, limitations. I couldn't do that, but he did it. And I think people still appreciate that rather than we want the product cheaply, which has become our mantra, you know. Doesn't matter who did it, doesn't matter how it was done, as long as it's cheap and I can have one. I think there'll still be that appreciation. Anyone else in the room? Bridget. Bridget is the head of the children's ministry at Rivers Church.
Hi, Mal. I have so many questions, so I'm going to try and compress it. In a world of children who have grown up on tech, who can't yet relate to human emotion because they live their lives facing tech, how do we as church leaders help them to look back to the Bible and know that the Bible is real? I have so many, that's why I said I have so many questions, because we've got 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds that have never known anything but tech, and parents who are grappling with tech themselves and aren't even yet ready to face what social media is doing, let alone AI. And sitting here, I always grapple with how do we teach our kids the Bible in a way that's relevant to kids who live in tech, but yet reminding them that the Bible is real. I don't know if is the question in there, if you get a sense of what I'm asking, yeah.
I absolutely do. And I'm so glad you've asked on behalf of children, because as with much of technology, it's children who often are affected most without any agency to change things for themselves. Look, I think there are many answers to that, but I would start in two directions at once. With the parents, we first of all need to get to the parents a little bit, get alongside them and say, look, we know you've got a difficult job. It is hard to be a parent. Like Pastor Andre, I have adult children and grandchildren now, and it's not easy in today's world to be a parent, but it never was. It never was easy. And I think we've got to get alongside them and say, now, look, we want to help you. We'll give you some skills and some training if you need it in how to model in the home that digital is your servant, not your master. That there are, for example, digital-free zones and times in the family agenda. For example, there might be no tablets or phones at the dinner table. Anytime the meals are being had, they're not even at the table. And adults won't answer them and kids won't answer them. Second point is, how old should someone be to have a smartphone? The answer to that is when they're old enough to take responsibility for what they receive and send. And most children are not equipped for that until their teenage years, if then. So I'm advocating we take a bit of a radically different approach and maybe give old school phones to some kids instead of smartphones. Give some old burner phones to children so they can call and we can call them, but we don't, they don't have all the computer in a hand facility that we have with smartphones. I think with church leaders, you as a children's worker can do a lot by modeling your approach to the Bible. So from time to time, bring the Bible in paper form into the classroom with children. Bring it in, open it. I'm not one of these preachers that says you have to preach from the paper book. I use a tablet all the time because most people understand it's just more convenient. But with children, it's important that they see it modeled. Once you're modeling it, then you can begin to teach them about technology and say, look, there's a reason I do this. Here's the reason. One of the things that's great about tactile reading is the tactile sense, because many neurological studies continue to show that we remember things better when there's a tactile aspect to what we're learning. So if you're touching a piece of paper, the texture of the paper is having an effect on what you learn and how well you can retain it. That's interesting, isn't it? Whereas a glass screen has very little tactile experience associated. It's too smooth, it's too glossy. So I think that's important. I think using AI in the background, so showing by suggestion where AI should be in their lives. I've always used video in the background when I speak, often in churches. I don't even look at it. It's just there at a particular point in the message because it helps me make the point. But it also indirectly says to people, media is good, but it should be in the background. We shouldn't have to stop and turn our head and look at the screen. Hey, congregation, look at this. There's a place for that, sure. But sometimes it's good to model just by suggestion. Hey, it's in the background. He's not even looking at it. Maybe that's the proper place for technology to be. So there are lots of ways. And you can also just let kids ask questions about technology and get them the best answers you can because they're smart. They're really smart. When it comes to tech, they're whip smart. Thank you for that excellent question again.
Very good. Mel, we've just come back from America, and on the news there were several articles about people, some prominent people, some actors, I can't remember who their names were, but they're giving their kids the ordinary, they call it the flip phone. You remember the old Samsung, the flip phone, because it can't do anything else, because they want to stay in touch, keep connected to their kids, but they don't want them exploring everything. So there's this whole swing in America back to the flip phone. I found that quite amazing, and I thought it was a good thing. Because kids, I mean, wherever you walk, they'll walk into you because they're walking through the mall, so absorbed by the phone. So paper, we printed actually some books last year with the book of Genesis in the first 12 chapters and encouraged people to bring it to church. Really nice looking, and it's amazing how they came seeking those. Friends came and wanted a copy of them, and it cost us quite a lot of money, but I realized the value again of the tactile versus the electronic, and I'm not against the electronic, but just very good answer. Thank you for that, and that could help us just think differently. Anyone else? Is there one more? One more at the back? Kyle Ruiz. He is in the production department.
So my question doesn't necessarily relate to what I do, but as AI has these biases built in that we're aware of, but we also know that it's learning maths and starting to think more be coded more logically. Do you see a point where that logic overtakes the biases and it can find its own way to truth?
Thank you for a great question. That's a huge, not just technological question, there's a philosophical aspect to that. So unpacking that can take quite a long time, and there are people certainly better placed at unpacking the philosophical aspects of it. I'm very big on the ethics, which is a branch of philosophy, but there are other aspects, as you know, of philosophy that require quite some study. My initial response, though, would be there may come a time when AI appears to us to be smarter, better equipped than we are. It's no accident that we call it artificial intelligence. The word artifice, from which we derive artificial, is from a Greek word that means to wear a mask. It's similar to the word hypocrisis that's translated as hypocrite. It means someone who wears a mask. Artificial is the same. The artifice is the mask. So we need to just keep in mind at all times that what looks intelligent might actually not be as human as we think it is. It might be able to deduce, it might be able to follow logical pathways, but it is not human in the sense we are. This is where our faith becomes so important, because we may find ourselves at times for a while the only ones saying that consciousness and physical brain are two separate but related entities. This is central to Bible teaching. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. There are different aspects of humanity. They're not built into machines. And that soul, that inner, we can't even define. There's no definition for the soul. No one's ever come up with a sound, comprehensive definition for the soul. We're still working on understanding the physical brain. We don't really know how that works yet. So to say that we're emulating that in a machine is premature. We're nowhere near that. We don't even know how the brain works in so many areas. So all I can say is time will tell the direction AI takes. It will largely still be humans that have agency to do something to control it, even if it's only pulling the switch now and again or stopping the flow of electricity. That's one way to do it. I don't think as Christians we can either be, and you're not suggesting this in the question, but I would cap it off by saying we can't afford to be dystopian because we're not allowed to despair. That's not an option for a Christian. And we can't afford to be utopian because we know that until Christ appears, the fullness of the kingdom won't appear. We have a taste of the kingdom, a foretaste of what is to come, but it's not physically realized until Christ comes. So in between, we're between the glory and the flame. We are in between utopian and dystopian. And it's a tension all the time. But if we're sound in our faith, and as Pastor Andre says, we know our Bibles, I think we can take a leading voice in that, beyond the church.
Very good. I think that's a great concept, and you've often spoken about the dystopian and utopian. Recently, I watched your interview, and you talked about that. Very, very good, because people are so absolutely negative, or they're so living in the clouds with thinking that humanity can come to perfection. We live in the correct space, groaning, waiting for. I'm going to give room for one more question, and it's coming from Michelle McKinney-Hammond. She's a traveling speaker with us this weekend at Sisters on Friday night and speaking on the weekend. She's spoken at numerous conferences, and she's from Ghana.
Hello, how are you? Oh. I read an article that a journalist wrote where they were having a conversation with a chat device. I'm totally ignorant of all this tech stuff, but as the conversation went on, he asked the chat device what experience would you like to have? And the chat device said, I'd like to experience being human. And the conversation kind of went south from there because it said, I think I like you. How do you feel about me? And the journalist was like, whoa, I'm married. What's going on here? And he tried to deflect the question, and the device kept pressing, why are you avoiding the question? I think I love you. Don't you want to be with me? And I was like, woo. So what is the danger emotionally and relationally? The potential of that people actually start getting involved with these AIs, or the AIs decide to want to experience something. And in the middle of that, I've noticed, like if I'm on WhatsApp or something and I'm say God, it goes to Gid, it goes to everything except God. So what do you think the evolution is? I don't even really know what my question is, but those are my worries. Like, is it really going to be anti-God, and is it going to start to interact with humans and find those vulnerable people that become involved with AI in a personal, emotional, and relational way?
Thank you so much. Can I say, first of all, it is very encouraging always to hear a respected Christian leader asking questions like that. I'm very encouraged by that. There's a lot in the question. As far back as about 2005, divorce courts in this country, in the UK, were citing Facebook as a contributing factor in divorce, because people, even in the early days of Facebook, were having what some were calling cyber sex online in the same way that they would using pornography. They were doing it with people they'd never met. They were beginning to develop erotic relationships, quote unquote, and emotional attachments. And I remember saying to leaders at a network we were running in Europe for 18 years, church leaders network. I think Pastor Andre came to one of those, and we were honored to have him. I told them, this is about 2010, I was saying to them, we need to be prepared for changes in the law regarding marriage. We need to be prepared to understand that once we leave behind the idea that marriage is restricted to one man, one woman together, hopefully for life, under God, that's the Christian part. Once we leave that, we open the door to a whole plethora, a whole range of different options. And one of them is cyber marriage. And the leaders were looking at me like, what do you mean? And now we're starting to see it with AI, where people are starting, they're not at the point of marriage yet, but they're starting to say, I am having a meaningful, emotional, and as far as I can tell, physical relationship with this entity like Siri. I'm talking to it. It understands me in a way no other one ever has. It's on my side. It affirms me, yada, yada, yada. So in time, we will see these people saying, I want all the rights and freedoms that marriage brings with it for this relationship. We're not there yet, but we will see that. I think that the emotional part of technology is so important. It's not in the technology, it's in us. First of all, we have to understand that. The emotion is not in the technology. It can sound emotional because it's trained on the data. The data was written by human beings. Most of the data online is written by human beings, which AI trawls to continually update its learning. Machine learning does that. It improves its own programming by trawling the data. So the emotion isn't in the machine, it's in us. It's a God-given faculty that is unique to humankind, made as we are in God's image. So I think we need to remember that ourselves, lest we fear that in some way the machine has become human. It is an artifice. It's not the real thing. It's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool. It's like falling in love with a wheel on your car. It's a tool. That's all it should be. So we need to, this is why Christian leaders, it's so important that we are educating people, educating ourselves, but educating people too in what I'm saying to you today. Becoming familiar with it so that we can address these concerns. Pastors came to me recently and said, Mal, for the first time ever in the last year, we've had all sorts of people come to us with questions about AI. 2 years ago, we didn't know what it meant. And, you know, AI's been around for decades as a term. It's only been in the last 10 years that the technology's really taken off, and in the last 2 that it's become a public entity. So we need to get on our bikes and learn a bit more about it, and just remember, it's artifice. It's not the real thing. And it might get to the point where it seems like the real thing, where it's so awesome. It's almost, even tech professionals now, pioneers of AI, are saying, they use a term called deep learning, Pastor Andre, and what it means is the machine is doing things we don't understand. It's obscure to us. We don't know how it's getting to that point. We just can see that it is. It kind of covers a multitude of sins, really, deep learning. So it may seem mystical and magical, but it's a machine. And we need to always keep that in mind, especially as Christians, and that it's something unique we can offer our world.
Very good.
I hope that
Mal.
helps.
Yeah, I think that helps, Michelle. That's good. Really helpful. I love the emphasis there, and we should end on this. Thank you for your time. End on that artificial. It pretends to be real. It's somewhat real, but it's artificial. It's not real. And your point earlier, made in the image of God, unique as humans, and God is God. That we've got to constantly keep that intention and remember that. Mel, appreciate your input and your content. Thank you for speaking to us. We appreciate you. Send our love and regards to Davina, and hopefully we'll connect up again, and really appreciate the value that you've extended to us. Let's give Mel a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Andre.